Welcome to Microsoft Excel Lesson 6 by Megan Race. In this assignment, we're going to be learning how to filter, how to use the if functions, and how to round numbers. We're starting to get into the more advanced features in Excel, which can be a little more challenging but are also a lot more fun. In fact, some of the stuff we do with the if function feels a little bit like coding. And it's one of my favorite things to use. In fact, I've been using the if function through this entire series. Every time you get a check mark that says you got the right answer, that's an if function at work to show you that. So we're going to go ahead and make sure you've opened up your pre-assessment and checked any of the squares that you already know. At this point, you're probably getting to the point where you don't know most of the stuff you're learning already. So it's just perfectly fine to check the box that says, I don't know any of these. But let's go ahead and start with the filter. So on the filter tab, a filter is when you want to take a vast amount of information and you want to pare it down. You want to ask a question and say, well, show me, it's basically like a query that you would do in a database where you say, show me everybody who has these particular traits. So show me everyone whose birthday is after this date, whose last name starts with a J, something like that. Or show me everyone whose caseworker is Logan and who owes more than $11,000, right? So you're just asking questions. But first you want to highlight the range of cells that show the fields for each of these areas. Okay, these are terms that we also use in database. So name, gender, birth date, these are the titles for all the information that we have. So we're going to highlight this range, we're going to go to data, and we're going to choose filter. Okay, once we've done that, we now have little arrows I can pull down that allow me to filter the information. So you can have text filters and you can have number filters. Okay, so on the text filters, first of all, notice that you've got select all. This is how you can turn everybody off if you want to. And you've got clear, which is how you clear a filter after you've already used it. Okay, so I'm going to keep the select all on, but I'm going to go to text filter and say, just show me all the people whose last names begin with an S. And I click OK, and now only the S's are showing. And then I could say, and of those people, show me only the people that have a yes, right? And so that can narrow it down just to 2 people, okay? Now that I've done my filter, maybe that answers my question, and now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to clear both of these because see how they have a symbol that shows that this has been filtered, and I'm going to clear those out, okay? So that's a text filter, and there's not as many things you can do with the text filter as you can with a number filter. There's a date filter on here, but you don't really have dates on yours, but so you won't ever have to actually use this on this assignment. But you know, show me everybody's last week, next week, after this date, whatever. Pretty self-explanatory. And I could be like, oh, show me everyone who has Wagner and who is female, right? So lots of ways that you can use those text filters. And then don't forget to clear them out before you go to the next question. Now with a number filter, this one has a little bit more to it. You could say, show me everybody that this number is greater than $500, which is pretty much everybody. Show me, let's try another one let's do that again. Let's say $2,000. There we go. Narrowed it down a little bit, okay? Or show me everybody that is in the top 10. You'll use that one a lot. You could do bottom 10 as well, okay? Or you could say, show me the average, right? Show me everyone who's below average, right? So it just calculated the average on its own and then just showed me everyone that's below average. Okay, so that's different ways that you can use that. Now, here's the thing, though. If you, there's a couple of questions that are going to say, how many countries have this issue? So maybe I highlight it and I want to know everybody who has Kingsbury. Okay, now this is a small list, so it counts it for, I can just count that, you know, that's not a big deal, but your list is bigger, and you might be filtering giant lists where there's still a lot of people. But if I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll just count that, right? I can just go in and maybe I want to add up this number, or I'll average it or something. Let's count it. Okay, so I count numbers, I got the answer 32. Okay, that's because it's counting all of the columns that are the rows that are being hidden. So that doesn't work very well. What I have to do is use a function called the subtotal function. So I would do equals subtotal, open parenthesis. Now when I do that, it gives me all these little codes. So I would say, okay, count, I double click on that, then I say comma, because this is all the different parts of the equation here. So subtotal 2 means I'm doing a count function. Then I highlight all the amounts, and then I press enter, and now it counts 8. So if you need to use that, Certainly, it's not necessarily required, but it might make it a little easier on some of the questions to just count the numbers instead of having to count them by hand, making sure you get the right answer. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click. And that should be enough to get you through the filter questions. Make sure on your assignment you actually have questions in here that you need to answer. Okay, so you use the filter and you answer the questions that are in here. You'll get a check mark when they're all correct. And then on your post-assessment, that amount will add up over here. So don't skip it. I will know if you haven't done it. It's part of the assignment. Make sure you fill that out. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is if functions, which I have to admit are one of my favorite things to do in Excel. And an if function is basically you're asking a question and you're saying if the answer is this, then I want this to happen. And if the answer is not that, then I want this other thing to happen. So if the answer is yes, then give me 5 points. And if the answer is no, then give me 0 points. So in order to do an if function, we have to break it down into its pieces. So far, most of the functions we've done have just been like, add this, count this. But if has different parameters. It has pieces to it, okay? So if we go in here and we type in the if function, I don't know if we've really done an if function this way before, but this is kind of nice because it lets you lay it out a little bit. So there's the logical test, which is what am I looking for? If this equals that, or if this is greater than that, or minus that, or if this, what is the test? What are you trying to find out? And if it's true, then what do you want to happen? And if it's false, what do you want to happen, right? So let's take the scenario here. This is kind of how I'm getting your check marks using the if function every time you get a check mark. So let's say that the student answer, they type the word yes, and that's the right answer, okay? So I'm going to create an if function that will say if it's a yes, then 5 points. If it's a no, then 0. So I'm going to say equals if, okay, open parenthesis, logical test. If this equals, now because it's a word, I have to put it in quotes, right? If it equals yes, okay, that's the logical test. Then I put a comma, comma. Then, the comma is the word then, okay? Just think of that. The comma is saying then. 5, okay? That's the value if it's true, comma. The value if it's false is 0. Press enter, I get a 5. If I go and change this to a no, I get a 0. Or basically to anything else, I get a no, okay? It will only give me the 5 points if I have the word yes. If I type a Y, it's not going to accept it. I have to have the word yes, right? Now, I could set it up another way. Instead of saying 0, okay, I could add a nested parameter. This is called a nested if function. I could say 5, comma. Then I could say if, open parentheses, this equals no, then 0, right? So I could give it another one. Now because there's 2 parentheses, I got to put 2 parentheses on the end. Okay, so if you have a nested one, there's 2 ifs that are nested, then I have to do 2 parentheses. I press enter. When I pull this down, okay, it's going to carry over, and now it says no. Or I could say if no, just to make this more interesting, if no, then panda bear. Because that just popped in my head. Okay, so now when I pull it down, it says panda bear, because that's what I put as the no answer, right? So it'll do whatever I tell it to do. It will do a number, whatever. I could do a math problem there. I could say if no, then... instead of a word, I could say then 7 times 3, right? It doesn't really matter. I can tell it what to do. Okay, I could say, just because there's numbers down here, I could say if no, then this times this, and it gives me that. Okay, so like say this one, if 14 is the right answer, if this equals 14, then 14 times 4, or 0. But you've got to give it, so now, okay, I messed up. Do you see how I got false? The word false comes up. That's because I messed up, which now if I look at it, I forgot to put the word if in there. But I'm kind of glad that happens. I can kind of show you what happens. Okay, if you mess up, you get the word false. So let's take it apart and see what exactly did I do wrong. So if, and you take it through that same test, logical test. If A8 equals A148 times 40, what's A148? I don't know how that happened. So that's clearly not what I wanted, right? So I got to make sure my logical test is right. I'm just going to delete all this out. Equals, if A8, okay, 14 equals, I don't know. Let's do is greater than this, then 5 points, or 6 points, or 0. Okay, so you just take it through that test again, okay, and it's not greater than that number, so it's going to give me a 0. I could change that to make it a less than, right, and then it will give me the points. So if you get a false, take it through the process again and see, okay, did I do my logical test? Do I have my if yes and if no? And see why it's not working. And if I do it greater than, I could do equals if, open parentheses, this is greater than, say, 12, then give me 5 points. Otherwise, give me 0 points. All right, let's do one with absolute values. So I would do equals if this number, let's say if it's greater than this number, then they pass. Okay, or otherwise, if it's not greater than, they fail. Okay, so it says the word pass. Great. Now, of course, when I drag it down, it looks like it's working, but it's really not. This 2500 should also have a pass. And that is because this 1000, okay, the A17 needs to have an absolute value. Okay, so if you saw what I did there, I went and added the absolute value, pushed F4, okay. And now when I drag it down, it's going to be more accurate because it's going to keep the A17 as an absolute value. So the next thing I want to show you is how to do nested if functions. In your assignment, you're going to be asked to do one with grades where it says, okay, if it's 90% or above, give them an A, and if it's 80% or above, give it a B. And so I'm going to show you how to do that, but of course, I don't like to show you exactly how. I like you to figure it out, but I'll show you my example, which is very similar, where if they have 10 points, it's a low. If it's 50 points, medium, 100 points or higher, it's a high, okay? And then here's all the points that have been given. So I'm going to do equals if the number I'm testing is greater than, and I like to start with the low one, is greater than 100. Now let me make this clear. I could click on the 100. If I click on the 100, I have to make it an absolute value so I can drag it down. So it really is only worth it to click on it if I'm going to change it later. In this case, it's always going to be the same. So I'm just going to type in 100. It makes my job a little easier. Okay. Then, so if it's greater than 100, but I want it to be equal, actually, greater than or equal to 100. Otherwise, if they get 100, it's still going to be counted as a medium, okay, because they're saying it has to be higher than 100. I want 100 to be high and higher. So greater than or equal to 100. Then high, right? Comma, starting a new one. If, same number, the 12, if it is greater than or equal to 50, then medium. Oops, make sure I spell it right. If, open parentheses, this number is greater than or equal to 10, then low. Okay, now I have to count my ifs. 1, 2, 3 ifs. So I have to do 3 parentheses at the end. Okay, and now when I drag down, this should work just fine. All my mediums came up, my highs, my lows, and whatnot. Okay, what if though I have a number in here that is 8? Okay, that's false because it's not covered, right? I never said what to do if it's below 10. So I could do, over here, I could just say comma 0, right? The comma 0 says if none of those things, then give them a 0. And that's what they did. They gave me a 0. It's in dollar format right now, so it made it a 0. Okay, so I want to make sure I cover every single parameter so that no matter what number's in there, it will know what to do. In this section, we're going to now talk about SUMIF and average if. So I have some data here that I've created. And just to point out, I did actually use a if-then function already on here. So if you look at this one, I did an if function like I showed you a few minutes ago to say if it's higher than 100, severe, or lower, it's kind of the similar thing. So if you want to kind of pause that, look at that, it helps a little bit. This is just library fines, what they're being charged, what their due date was, how many days late, and then how much trouble they're in, basically. So we're going to do an average if function and a SUMIF function. Now, the trick with average if and SUMIF is that there's an if there. So you're saying if such and such situation has happened, then I want you to average it. So, for example, only average the ones that say severe. Only average the ones that are more than 15 days late. Only average the ones that are higher than $10. So you're giving it a criteria. And because of that, you have to do the criteria information first. So normally, if I wanted to average this, I'd highlight the information I want to do, and I click average, okay? But in an average if situation, I'm going to do average if, okay? I highlight the range of what I'm checking, okay, of what the criteria is going to be. So even though ultimately I'm going to be averaging these numbers, first I'm going to say highlight all of these, okay, comma, severe. Okay, so it's only going to highlight the ones, it's only going to average the numbers that are severe, okay, comma, and then I highlight the information I'm going to average. I press enter, and it gives me an average for all of those numbers, okay. And I could do that for each one, for severe, low, high, medium, and it would come out the same as if I, averaged all of these together. Okay, so that's average if. Now sum if, exact same thing. Okay, sum if, highlight this, comma, let's say this time I want to do high, okay, comma, highlight all the finds, press enter, and there's my sum if. So it only added the ones the two yellow ones basically. And if you look at this number, 475 plus 290 is going to get you 765, right? So it just added those two numbers together. So that's sum if and average if. Now, it can get a little tricky. There is a kind of an unusual thing when you do operands in sum if and average if. Because unlike anything else I've seen in Excel, you have to use quotes, okay? Normally we only use quotes if we're using a word, right? High, medium, low. I put them in quotes because it's text. If it's, if I wanted it to just say 100, let's say if I wanted to say, instead of severe, if I wanted it to just say 100, then it would say 100. Like I don't have to put quotes around it, right? But I do have to do that in sum if and average if. So for example, if I'm taking equals average if, I highlight the information. Actually, let's do it over here. We'll do this one. Okay, average if this information, comma, and then I put in quotes, is greater than 80. Okay, end quote. Then give me that information. Okay, and that works great, but you have to put in quotes greater than 80. If you take the quotes out, it doesn't work. Okay, so again, remember that when you're doing average if and sum if, and if you're using an operand, you have to put quotes around it in order for it to work. Okay, next we're going to be talking about rounding, and this one's really straightforward. It won't take very long. So rounding, you can basically do it either going forwards and doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or rounding it negatives, okay? And so honestly, it's just kind of a matter of figuring it out. So if I type in equals round, close parenthesis or open parenthesis, click on the number, okay? And then I do comma, and it's number of digits. And you're like, number of digits, what does that mean? So let's try a 1, see what happens, okay? It basically rounded it 1 digit. So instead of saying 0.56, it now says 0.6. It rounded it 1 digit. What if I did 2? Okay, it's the same, okay? Let's do 3. See what happens. Okay, and it's just going to stay the same because there aren't any more digits. If I had a bunch in here, okay, then it would let me. It's just saying how many digits to the right can I round it, okay? And I can also try it the other direction. What if I say -1, okay? It took it to 5850, so it rounded it that direction. Or I could say round it -2, and now it's 5800, okay? Or -3, and so forth, right? Now it can't go any farther because that's as big a number as it is, right? So again, doing the round this way, round, I click on this and I say 1, it's going to give me 1.1. It took 1 digit off. If I say -1, then it's going to go the other way, okay? So that's basically how rounding works. It's pretty straightforward, and in your assignment it makes it very clear. But just remember that the parameters are round, and then what number you're rounding, and then what direction you're going and how many decimal places. So am I going forward and how far, or am I going backward and how far? So, well, I shouldn't say forward. What am I going to the left, or am I going to the right of the decimal point? Now, one thing that I do want to point out, if you haven't noticed this button already, in rounding it's very useful, is these two buttons here. Sometimes you might have like a great big number in here, but Excel doesn't show you the number. It's not big enough, or for whatever, you don't know it's there. And so this allows you to see how many digits there really are, okay? And so you can go either direction. But let me be clear, it does not change the value of the number that's in that box. No matter how much you go forward or backwards, the value is still the same in the box. Okay, that should prepare you to do the application, which when you're finished, it should look something like this, okay? which is kind of a lot to throw at you, but I know you can do it. You should be able to filter it. You should have everything you're going to use conditional formatting. You're going to be using if functions. Anyway, go ahead and give that a try, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in assignment 7 with VLOOKUP tables, which are awesome.